Yo, fuck Cocaine Bear. How about a 19th century strongman who knew French murder karate, who was killed when the cannon he was carrying was mislit and blew the back of his head off? Yeah! This dude, Louis Vigneron, which means winemaker, had 16.5-inch cold measured arms that he had measured on a bet so that he could win more Vin Mariani, a cocoa wine that was his favorite fucking thing and ultimately led to his demise. This man was the greatest fighter that I know of at the time. He fought wrestlers, he fought English boxers, he was all trying to prove that savate was the best fighting style in Europe at the time. And he did a damn fine job of proving it. What ultimately was his undoing was the fact that he loved performing by carrying a 305 kg, almost 700-pound cannon on his shoulder, which was loaded onto his shoulder by 4 men. This thing was mislit by his zooted assistant, and when he looked back to go, "What the fuck are you doing?" it smashed him in the back of the head when it exploded unexpectedly, smashed the back of his head in, and even though his brains were laying on the ground, people still expected him to get up off the ground because he was that much of a fucking badass. Now, it wasn't just because this dude was such a fucking badass that they thought he was just going to get up with half his brains laying on the ground. It was because this man was zooted out of his fucking brains. They all were. So, if you haven't read my stuff, Vin Mariani was one of many cocoa wines that was available in the 1800s. Cocoa wines are exactly what they sound like. They are wine with cocaine in them. They were really ingenious. So instead of actually going through the process of extracting the cocaine from the coca leaves, what the manufacturers of Vin Mariani did was they suspended coca leaves inside of Bordeaux wine. The ethanol would pull the cocaine out, and then it would deliver 250 plus milligrams of delicious, delicious cocaine in every single bottle. That is, obviously it's a tenth of what William Halsted, the guy who invented modern anesthesiology, was using every day when he invented anesthesiology, but it still is 10 times more than coke than you get out of a line, apparently. So, at least according to a 1972 Rolling Stone article about cocaine. So, so cocaine is the driving force behind this man's feats, and it was the driving force behind most of the things that you saw going on back then. Vin Mariani did come in 3 different types too, and it was not the only coca wine. It came in tablets, it came in a tea, and it came in it came in an extra strength form, because clearly they weren't getting enough coke out of that 253 milligrams. And because this was so popular, and I've mentioned that the French, I've mentioned that there were several popes that loved Vin Mariani. Cats love Vin Mariani. Every single cyclist in France endorsed the stuff. It was crazy popular. It was so popular that even cats wanted to get in on the deal. Unfortunately, cats on cocaine are a terrible idea. Huh, baby. But so these guys were zooted. Now, Louis Vigneron wasn't just the strongest motherfucker in Europe at the time. He was also the baddest fighter of the time, and he fought using a new style called savate. Savate was French kickboxing. It was originally a style of street fighting that developed into a form of like kind of play fighting among sailors, and it was also used as street fighting. So there were these 2 different styles that were related and very, very heavy on kicks. They didn't use closed fists because at the time France was a mess and people were very violent. So they were constantly carrying weapons, and because it was illegal to carry a gun, they all fought with canes or knives. And so in this style, it was open-handed with a knife or a cane in one hand, and you were using a lot of kicks. He was a master of this style. He defeated an English boxer and was the first saboteur to do it. He was also the first saboteur to defeat a wrestler in a fight. So this man crossed all these different, and that's why when he got hit in the back of the head with this cannon and his brains fell onto the ground, everybody was like, he's going to get back up, because he could fuck up anybody, anywhere, at any time. Having been a natty bro, I understand how much consternation this is probably causing you. Because I'm sure that there are a lot of you going, well, everybody in my gym's on fucking gear and I don't use gear and blah, 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 blah. Nobody gives a fuck about any of that. This isn't that. We're talking about a time in which the guy who invented anesthesiology was doing 2 grams of coke a day. The guy who invented modern surgery and the dumb-ass intern bullshit that these fucking people do where they're working 24 hours at a time, that was invented by, surprise, a fucking cokehead. A cokehead who was trying to get off of a vicious morphine addiction, and so he chose coke, just like Sigmund Freud did. Sigmund Freud was also in that same boat. Another person who was in that boat, the author of Sherlock Holmes, who will show up later in this video, that guy who was a knight, vicious coke habit, because, and you know this not because of eyewitness accounts of this man shooting up coke, but because the protagonist of his fucking books was shooting coke. That isn't coke for fun. That's coke for serious. That's coke for somebody who has a real fucking coke problem. And Sherlock Holmes was shooting coke 3 times a day in his fucking books. He actually solved crimes because it was the only way he could stop doing coke. So this is a different era of people. And that's how this motherfucker was walking around with a 305 kg cannon on his shoulder, which he would fire off. And this would have given him the craziest abs the person's ever seen. And I know in the pictures this man doesn't look like shit. His obliques must have been hanging off his fucking sides like canned hams. Like obliques like nobody's ever seen before. Tragically, we don't have a picture of this guy with his shirt off. But I think part of the reason why this guy was into this goofy-ass move, 1, was because nobody else could fucking do it. 2, it was crazy. 3, cocaine probably made it seem like the greatest fucking idea on earth. Kind of like that fucking goof who invented the Kevlar vest. Just running around having people shoot him in the chest with a .44 Magnum all day long. There's fucking craziness. Crazy people do crazy shit, and cocaine makes them act crazier. But the cool shit about this is because the man was a bad motherfucker in fighting, and Savate was really, really big on liver kicks, which if anybody who's a fan of Bas Rutten is really familiar with the effect of a liver kick that it can have on you. If you have never been kicked in the liver or punched in the liver, it is a different type of unpleasantness. Your whole body rebels. It feels like your cells are vomiting when you get kicked in the liver. And the Savateurs, the way they used to fight, Lacour, as I mentioned, he devised 2 separate type. I don't know if I've mentioned that. I've done so many fucking videos of trying to get this out. But Charles Lacour, who invented this style, he split it into 2 separate styles. One was, 3. There was a con de combat, which was with the cane. That was cane fighting, stick fighting. And then there was a sport fighting version of Savate that was done in soft-toed shoes for the rich people, and it was based on the way the sailors used to train. And then there was a hardcore street fighting style. Now, they often fought with hard-toed shoes, and that was actually how his Vigneron's best student, Joseph Charlemagne, he actually defeated an English boxer in the second known fight between Savate and English boxing. And he was only able to win. His hand game was trash. These guys could not box, especially at this time. They were, as I mentioned, it was all open hand shit. They could not throw fists. So if they couldn't get into a position where they could kick somebody and fuck them up, they couldn't win. The Charlemagne defeated his opponent by kicking him in the balls with a fucking push kick with steel boots or steel shoes on. And because they fought with steel-toed shoes or really, really hard tip shoes, real big on liver kicks. Those probably would have had no effect on a man whose obliques were inured to keeping a fucking cannon from rotating on the man's back when it had been fired off. So that probably would have played nicely into his Saboteur thing. And if you're a fighter out there and you're thinking maybe there's something here I can apply, I would not advise the cannon on the shoulder trick to try to build up your obliques. I'm sure there are better. Now, because I love history so much, I need to impart this last bit to you. I could teach history to anyone, and I could teach anything to anyone. Literature, for instance, to a monkey using lifting. And here's the way. Let me teach you a little bit of literature history using this guy, Louis Vigneron. Now, I can take you from Louis Vigneron to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as well as William Hope Hodgson, who was a bodybuilding horror writer who is also in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's literary universe now, kind of an MCU for Sherlock Holmes. The reason why this is, and Harry Houdini is involved in this story. We're going to take it back to the early 1800s. We got a guy named Michel Cassiu, and this guy fought in a style called Pissu. Super fucking brutal, very, very, very dirty style. You got this little picture in there. He was apparently a pox-covered, skinny little man, vicious fucking bull. He taught Charles Lecour this style it was very, very popular, but it was split into two styles. There was a style that the sailors on ships really like to use, and so when you see these odd positions where people are reaching back to they're in this weird kicking, where they're kicking one way and leaning way back with their arms the other way, that is because they're used to grabbing onto rails or ropes or something like that in order to have the counterbalance for kicking. The sport fighting on ships was done in soft shoes, and it was just done as a kind of a touch fighting. It really wasn't like anything brutal. Whereas in the street, like I mentioned, they were using knives. They were using the cane. And Charles Lecour split out this sport. He made one sport for the effete noblemen, where they fought with light gloves, light shoes, and it was sport fighting savate that was really, really very low impact. It was we'll call it, it was the Taibo of savate. He created that. Then he created la canne, which was cane fighting. Now, this is where it gets really cool. One of the best cane fighters was also Louis Vigneron. Although he was not the person who taught the person, his student was. The first guy to beat Louis Vigneron was a guy named Joseph Charlemont. Charlemont had a kid named Charles Charlemont. Charles Charlemont is, he's a guy you'll see in videos. If you see a video of the early 1900s where, actually I'll put it into this thing, where they're doing stick fighting, that is the younger Charles Charlemont. Now, these guys, the Charlemonts, were very, very famous instructors, and Joseph Charlemont was the first guy after Louis Vigneron to actually fight an English fighter. He won by kicking him in the balls with steel-toed shoes. Not a very, very impressive way to win, but he did still win. That is all unimportant, because going back to it, there was a guy named Vigny who trained with Joseph Charlemont and then went to Switzerland. He and his wife developed this style of combat, which he then took to England, and he taught to a guy named Edwin Barton Wright. Edwin Barton Wright created a style called Bartitsu, which you know from the movies, the Sherlock Holmes movies, starring the guy from Iron Man. Those movies are actually accurate representations of what we have as a reconstructed form of Edwin Barton Wright's Bartitsu. Now, that's considered to be the first hybrid martial art by a lot of people. That's nonsense. There were hybrid martial arts forever. But it was a very cool hybrid martial art that mixed like judo and Kodokan karate and then this candy combat to create a gentlemanly fighting art where you used your umbrella, like your umbrella or a walking cane, as your primary mode of defense. That style then was taught to Harry Houdini, was a very accomplished boxer and a very, very, very bad motherfucker. And Harry Houdini was he was enemies with William Hope Hodgson, who injured him in a stunt to, he was trying to prove that Harry Houdini couldn't get out of every single shackles, and Harry Houdini did, but he ended up injuring himself and getting bad nerve damage, and they hated each other ever since. Which is funny because Harry Houdini ended up also hating the Sherlock Holmes dude, because the Sherlock Holmes dude was into spiritualism, as was his wife, which was really, really popular at the time, and everybody went to seances and all this stupid bullshit and thought they were talking to their spirits of their dead people, and it was all charlatans just hoaxing them and taking all their money, and Houdini really liked to debunk these people, and so he was really pissed at Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife for believing in this stupid horse shit, and finally cut them off. But not before he would have learned about our man Louis Vigneron, and also he would have imparted that knowledge to George Hackenschmidt. with whom Harry Houdini was in some lost film where he apparently defeats George Hackenschmidt in a wrestling match. I would love to see that shit. I'm sure it was just he was using the art of trickery and fuck, my brain's falling out. But anyway, all of the magician shit that you see in order to that modern filmmakers use in order to do the practical special effects you see in stuff like the Hobbit movies. That was all from magicians working in the early 1900s, late 1800s, of which Harry Houdini was one. So there you go. I actually took us all the fucking way to the Sherlock Holmes and Hobbit movies from this guy, Louis Vigneron. History is fucking dope. That's what I'm saying. Go to plagueofstrength.com to get all this dope shit and more.